This one title, obviously, is Fighting Discrimination Against People with HIV. Just a little bit of housekeeping. As you remember, if you haven't used our system before, you can hit the little hand button to raise your hand. At the end, when you have a question, I can unmute your line, or you can ask it in the box, and I can read your question from there. All that being said, I am super excited to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Felicia Sadler, who is a trial attorney at the United States Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division in the Disability Rights section. She is an amazing individual, advocate, lawyer, and you will be wowed by her talent today. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Sadler.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Department of Justice, I would just first like to say that we're very excited today to partner with the Black AIDS Institute in providing this webinar on fighting discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. Now, what you will learn today, you will learn what is illegal discrimination against persons with HIV/AIDS in employment, housing, and the provision of public and private services. And you can switch to the next slide. What you also learn is what to do if someone has been illegally discriminated against based on HIV and AIDS. You will learn where you can get more information and a brief introduction into lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex individuals' protection. Now, President Barack Obama created the National AIDS Strategy in July of 2010. And that particular strategy, some of the goals were to reduce new HIV infections, to increasing access to care and improving health outcomes for people living with HIV, and most importantly, this particular initiative asked the Department of Justice to take the lead in reducing HIV-related health disparities by reducing stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV and strengthening enforcement of civil rights law. In July of this year, the White House updated the National AIDS Strategy. Now, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, in order to actually implement the strategy, we were committed to do the following things: educate a target populations through outreach, prioritize investigations of HIV discrimination, and examine and report on HIV-specific sentencing laws and implications for people living with HIV. We also would like for you to know that there will be a new implementation of the National AIDS Strategy released on National World AIDS Day on December 1st of this year. Also, in an effort to reform HIV-specific criminal laws, attorneys from the Department of Justice and the Center for Disease Control in March of 2014 wrote a journal article with the CDC examining state and local laws that criminalize potential HIV exposure. In July of 2014, we released the Best Practices Guide recommending that any such laws reflect a contemporary understanding of HIV, including transmission routes and associated benefits of treatment. Both of these documents, which we encourage you to actually look at, are available at www.ada.gov/AIDS. Now, let's talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. This act protects individuals with disabilities in employment, public services, meaning state and local government services, public accommodations, private providers of goods and services, when I refer to public accommodation. And the ADA, let's talk about what it protects. It protects someone substantially limited in a major life activity. Now, this includes the operation of a major bodily function, including functions of the immune system, such as HIV/AIDS. It also protects someone regarded as having a disability and someone associated with a person with a disability. And we want you to know that these protections are not limited to U.S. citizens. Employment. The ADA employment provisions do not apply to private employers with less than 15 employees, private membership clubs, Native American reservations, or churches and parochial schools. But we want you to know, if you think you have a complaint, file a complaint, even if you think an exception applies. The EEOC will do the proper analysis, and they might take your case, but they might not accept it if they do determine that one of the exceptions applies. But it's still to your benefit to make the effort to file the complaint. The ADA covers all employment practices, including recruitment, advertising, applying, hiring, compensation, promotion and advancement, terms, conditions, and privileges of employment. For example, leave and fringe benefits, training. It covers tenure, layoffs, and firing, and failure to provide reasonable accommodation. Now, what is a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation is a feasible change in a job environment or in performance of job duties to enable a qualified individual with a disability to perform the essential functions. Now, it's only required for known limitations. An employee must ask, but no magic words or formal written request is required. An employer may request documentary proof of disability and a functional limitation. The employer may choose the less expensive or less burdensome accommodation as long as it is effective. So just because an employee seeks a particular accommodation, it doesn't mean that the employer has to pick that one if they can find a less expensive one that is effective. Now, let's talk about when can an employer inquire about disability. Well, before making a job offer, the answer is never. After making a conditional offer and before an individual starts, sometimes, but only if all candidates are required to take the same medical exam and or respond to the same inquiry. For example, only if medical exams or inquiries are job-related and consistent with business necessity. Confidentiality. Information from all medical exams and inquiries must be kept apart from general personnel files as a separate confidential medical record available only under limited conditions. Retaliation. It is illegal for an employer to fire, demote, harass, or otherwise retaliate against an individual for filing a charge of discrimination, for participating in discrimination proceeding, or otherwise opposing discrimination. The ADA also protects individuals from coercion, intimidation, threats, harassment, or interference in exercise of their rights, or, for that matter, the encouragement of someone else exercising their rights that are granted by the ADA. Enforcement and remedies. The goal in employment cases is to make the individual whole. So you're looking at back pay, front pay, restored benefits, reasonable accommodation, compensatory damages, and that's, of course, for intentional discrimination, and reinstatement. Now, how to file a complaint? You can file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and their website and the numbers that you can call are located on this slide. You can contact the EEOC at the website, or you can call the actual office directly, and they will actually give you more information about how to file a complaint. You often have only 180 days to file. Now, 300 days will be granted to file if the state has a parallel statute. Employment resources, U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy. That's a resource guide for individuals seeking to enter or re-enter the workforce. There's the HIV/AIDS Employment Toolkit and the Job Accommodation Network. And these documents are available at the website below, http://www.dol.gov/odep/topics/HIV/AIDS/. State and local government services. Categories of state and local government services include police departments, probation programs, jails and prisons, county hospital, public libraries, and public schools. Public accommodations are private providers of goods and services, including restaurants, hotels, theaters, libraries, doctor's offices, dentist offices, hospitals, retail stores, health clubs, museums, private schools and daycare centers. However, private clubs or religious organizations are not included. Recent DOJ enforcement actions. The Milton Hershey School. In this particular case, a school refused to consider a child for enrollment after his mother disclosed that he has HIV. In that particular case, $700,000 in damages were awarded and a $15,000 civil penalty. Now, the school is required to adopt a policy prohibiting discrimination and requiring equal opportunity for students with disabilities in the school's programs and services. The school must also provide training to staff and administrators on the requirements of the ADA. And if you want more information on this agreement, please go to our website, www.ada.gov/AIDS. In the medical-related settings, current DOJ investigations include primary care physicians, oncologists, surgeons, and the use of universal precautions. It is very important to stress that all healthcare providers are required to use universal precautions in an effort to prevent and eliminate exposure to blood-borne diseases such as HIV. Healthcare providers may not refer, under any circumstances, the individual with HIV to another provider or specialist unless they will refer any individual seeking or requiring the same treatment or services to another healthcare provider. Additional DOJ enforcement actions. CHW Medical Foundation and Mercy Medical Group Incorporated. After meeting with the patient and examining him, a podiatrist determined that surgery was a possible treatment option, but refused to perform the surgery because the patient has HIV. In Knoxville Chiropractic Center, after examining him, a chiropractor determined that the patient required 24 chiropractic appointments to treat his injuries from a car accident. But on his third visit, the patient was publicly informed that they did not treat people like him who have HIV. For more information on this agreement, look at our website as well. In the bariatric clinic setting, 2 different patients were turned away from weight loss surgery because of a clinic policy not to take patients with HIV. In the Castlewood Treatment Center, an eating disorder clinic refused to admit a woman because of her HIV, but repeatedly led her to believe she would be admitted any day while encouraging her to go elsewhere. During this delay of up to 7 months, her health declined considerably. We received $115,000 in damages and a $25,000 civil penalty. For more information, please refer to our website. Settlements and consent decrees. When we find that someone has violated the ADA by discriminating against an individual, including an individual with HIV or AIDS, we can seek injunctive relief. We can ask that they be trained, they seek some type of treatment on how to treat people with HIV. We can actually report. We can also seek compensatory damages, actual damages, and pain and suffering damages. And if it's a private entity, we can seek civil money penalties. Now, to file an ADA complaint, you need to provide us with the details of the discrimination and mail, fax, or email the information to the address below, which is United States Department of Justice, Disability Rights Section, NYA, 950 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20530. Or you can fax information to 202-307-1197. Now, the actual website that we have below is no longer the one we use. If you want to email a complaint, feel free to email it to www.ada.gov/filing_complaint.htm. Or, for more information, please call the ADA information line at 1-800-514-0301 for voice call and 1-800-514-0383 for a TTY call. Now, the next slide just shows you some of the wonderful things that we have on ada.gov. We have several things that might be helpful, so we would encourage you to actually go visit our website. Some of the things that we have are information. We have a new pamphlet that just came out that actually gives you information about discrimination against individuals with disabilities. We have the information, actual report that we talked about earlier on state laws that criminalize potential HIV exposure in the United States. And we have our settlement agreements. We have technical assistance guidance. So we encourage you to look at our website because we have a wealth of resources that will be helpful for you if you need more information on HIV or AIDS. Now, the Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, including sexual harassment, disability, including HIV and AIDS, familial status, and national origin. Fair Housing Act dwellings prohibits discrimination in public and private dwellings, including housing, apartments, condominiums, and trailers, nursing homes, group homes, student housing, homeless shelters. Now, courts differ on required length of stay, so you might want to get more research from an attorney on what the length of stay requirement is for a particular dwelling. The Fair Housing Act prohibits the refusal to sell or rent after making a bona fide offer, refusing to negotiate for sale of rental of dwelling, otherwise making unavailable or denying a dwelling, setting different terms, conditions, or privileges, or providing different services or facilities, making, printing, or publishing a statement or advertising indicating a preference or limitation. It also prohibits falsely representing that a dwelling is unavailable, refusing to make reasonable accommodation and rules or services for a person with a disability, including a person with HIV or AIDS, to use the actual housing, refusing to allow the person with a disability, including HIV or AIDS, to make reasonable modifications to his or her dwelling, and intimidating, threatening, or interfering with any person for exercising his or her housing rights under the Fair Housing Act. Now, the Fair Housing Act does have limitations. Single-family homes sold, rented, or rented by the owner without real estate agent, owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 units, dwellings owned by religious organizations or private clubs for their own members' use, housing for older persons only where certain requirements are met. Please note, these exemptions are construed narrowly and entail various requirements. If you want to file a Fair Housing Act complaint, the next slide tells you how to do so. You can actually contact the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development at their website. The complaint must be filed within 1 year of the Discriminatory Act. Also, the Department of Justice Housing and Civil Enforcement section has jurisdiction over all cases of pattern or practice involving discrimination. You can also contact the Fair Housing section at thefairhousing@usdoj.gov, or you can call the office directly at the number below, 800-896-7743 for voice, or 202-305-1882 for TTY. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits creditors from discriminating against credit applicants on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, receipt of public assistance, and because a person has exercised rights under the Consumer Credit Protection Act. It covers any type of credit transaction, including mortgages, auto loans, and unsecured consumer loans. DOJ's Housing and Civil Enforcement sections has pattern or practice authority. Bank regulators also refer matters to the Department of Justice. To file an individual lending discrimination complaint, contact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at the website listed below, www.consumerfinance.gov/fair-lending. Or you can call 855-411-2372 for voice, or 855-729-2372 for TTY. Recent DOJ enforcement actions. In United States v. Wren, which actually is in the Northern District of Illinois, DOJ filed a lawsuit alleging that the owner and property manager of a 2-unit building in Chicago violated the Fair Housing Act on the basis of disability and/or familial status by refusing to rent to a woman because she has HIV and AIDS and/or because she had a minor child. And this case is about the fact that they engaged in a pattern of practice of similar discrimination based on familial status. In August of this year, the court found the practice of discrimination and awarded the woman $10,000. For more information on this particular agreement, please see the website below, http://www.justice.gov/crt/about/HCE/caselist.php. Additionally, recently in Gomez versus Quicken Loans out of the Central District of California, that lawsuit alleges that Quicken Loans improperly required loan applicants with disabilities, including the plaintiff who has HIV or AIDS, to provide medical information about their disabilities as a condition of receiving a mortgage. DOJ filed a statement of interest in the Ninth Circuit, arguing that the district court erred in dismissing the plaintiff's FHA disability and ECOA receipt of public assistance claim. The appeal was heard on June 5th of this year, and still this case is pending before the Ninth Circuit. For more information, please visit the website http://www.justice.gov/CRT/about/HCE/caselist.php. And at this particular time, it is my honor to turn over the next section to my colleague, who is an avid supporter and expert in this area, Megan Schuler, who will discuss protecting the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex individuals. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Megan Schuler. I know you just got a wealth of information from Felicia about HIV discrimination, and I just want to emphasize, as it may be a lot to absorb, that there are a lot of resources, as she mentioned, at ada.gov/AIDS. And I know there's a lot of different government agencies that we said you need to file different complaints with. If you have questions about that or you're not sure, you can also feel free to contact us at the 1-800 number that she provided, and they can tell you who to file it with. We just really encourage folks to try to contact us as soon as possible, since there are time limits for some of these complaints, particularly for the employment complaints and the housing complaints. But we do really encourage you to let us know if you're hearing about discrimination, because that is one of the major ways that it allows us to address discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS, and try to prevent stigma and discrimination from continuing. I'm going to give a really brief introduction to protecting the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex individuals, or LGBTI individuals, and some of the work that the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is doing in this area. But again, I will also provide you with resources where you can find more information should you have questions about it, since we don't have a lot of time to go into detail right now. So going to the next slide, this is just a quote from the former Attorney General Eric Holder from 2014 that emphasizes how important this issue is to the Department of Justice, saying, "Just as our forebears came together to overcome tremendous adversity and to forge the more just and more equal societies in which we now live, so too must the current generation rise to the causes that have become the struggles of our day, the defining civil rights challenges of our time. I believe one of these struggles is the fight for equality for our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, or LGBT citizens." There are, unfortunately, very few federal civil rights laws that specifically address sexual orientation and gender identity and protect people. But one that does, that was a groundbreaking law that we enforce, is the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009. This follows up on additional hate crimes acts that are out there, so this doesn't cover the whole scope of hate crimes protections, but importantly, it does criminalize violent conduct because of actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability if the offense is in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce. It also covers race, color, religion, and national origin, and those are not limited to where the offense is in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce. And there are additional hate crimes acts that address race, color, religion, and national origin as well. Violent conduct under the Shepard-Byrd Act includes willfully causing bodily injury or attempting to do so with a dangerous weapon. If you want to report a hate crime, you should contact your local FBI field office, which can be found on the FBI website, or if you Google FBI field offices, but their website is fba.gov/contact-us/field/field-offices. So the primary way that we enforce and address discrimination against LGBT individuals is through the many civil rights acts that cover sex discrimination. And there are a number of federal civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination in areas covering education, employment, housing, police practices, and other department-funded programs. So while these laws do not explicitly refer to sexual orientation or gender identity, they do prohibit sex discrimination. And courts have interpreted sex discrimination to protect all people, including LGBTI people, from gender-based discrimination. And gender-based discrimination includes discrimination based on a person's nonconformity with stereotypes associated with that person's real or perceived gender. So for example, if a person is gay and is being harassed for acting in the view of other people and in a feminine manner, walking in an effeminate manner, then they're not conforming with that person's stereotypes about a man, and that person then may have a sex discrimination claim. So that's sort of the concept that carries over through a lot of the different laws that I will touch on, and that is how we address discrimination against people to do with sexual orientation or gender identity. So in the education context, discrimination against LGBT students, we enforce Title IV of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which again prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, among other factors, in public schools, colleges, and universities. We also enforce Title IX, which prohibits sex discrimination in federally funded educational programs and activities. Both of these laws prohibit discrimination, including harassment, which is one way that we address bullying against LGBT students. There's a few resources listed here to do with bullying in schools if you want more information, as well as how to file a complaint with us. You can go to justice.gov/crt/about/edu. In the employment context, we enforce Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 against public employers, so that's state and local government employers. And Title VII prohibits discrimination in the workplace, including sex discrimination in recruiting, hiring, assignments and promotions, and pay and benefits, as well as gender-based harassment and retaliation for complaining about discrimination. Again, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission handles employment discrimination complaints. And again, there is that time limit that Felicia mentioned. It may be 180 days. In many states, it's 300, where they have a state law that also protects against employment discrimination. But you should contact the EEOC if you want to file an employment discrimination complaint. On housing, again, we enforce the Fair Housing Act. This includes disability, such as HIV, as Felicia discussed, and I won't go into detail about the Fair Housing Act all over again, but it does cover sex and sex discrimination in the sale or rental of housing and other residential real estate transactions. And the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, again, covers receipt of public assistance, which can be including due to HIV/AIDS status, and also covers sex. And again, for housing discrimination, those should be filed with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And we have some examples here of how this has been applied to LGBT individuals. In 2012, HUD issued a final rule entitled Equal Access to Housing in HUD Programs, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, which prohibits discrimination expressly on those bases by owners and operators of HUD-assisted housing, housing financed or insured by the Federal Housing Administration, and lenders insured by the Federal Housing Administration. So while the Fair Housing Act and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act don't specifically mention sexual orientation or gender identity, this rule now does expressly protect those categories of individuals if they receive assistance or fall into one of the categories I just mentioned. And recipients of discretionary funds must comply with local and state non-discrimination laws that cover sexual orientation or gender identity. Sorry, I'm going through this very quickly because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to keep plugging along, but we'll direct you to further resources. Defending the constitutional rights of people and institutions. Under a law that we like to call kripa for short, but which stands for the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, the Civil Rights Division has authority to investigate constitutional violations in state or local prisons, in juvenile detention centers, in nursing facilities, and other institutions. So examples of constitutional violations that we might investigate and address are the failure of prison officials to protect LGBTI inmates from violence, the denial of certain kinds of medical treatment to individuals diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which has formerly been referred to as gender identity disorder, or GID, and the unjustified segregation of LGBTI individuals. We also address discrimination by law enforcement. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, or 14141, as we sometimes refer to it, since that's a long title, allows the division to review the practices of law enforcement agencies that may be violating people's federal civil rights. The division can also use the anti-discrimination provisions of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which forbid discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, or national origin by agencies receiving federal funds. The division may act if we find a pattern or practice by the law enforcement agency that systemically is violating people's rights. And the problems addressed in our cases, many of which you may have seen in the news recently, include addressing the use of excessive force by law enforcement, unlawful stops, searches, or arrests, and discriminatory policing practices. We also address protecting the rights of intersex persons, and that's the I in LGBTI. The division forces, as Felicia explained, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which guarantees equal opportunity to individuals with disabilities. Under the ADA, an individual is considered to have a disability if the individual is substantially limited in a major life activity or major bodily function. This covers most of the over 36 different intersex conditions, including, for example, substantial limitations in the major life activity of reproduction or the major bodily function of the endocrine system. So in many cases, intersex individuals are protected by the ADA if they're discriminated against, if they're denied reasonable accommodations, or any of the various protections that Felicia discussed when talking about individuals with HIV and AIDS. There are some other tools in our toolbox, in addition to the investigations and enforcement actions that Felicia gave examples of. We also can file what we call amicus briefs or friend of the court briefs, or sometimes we'll refer to them as statements of interest, in federal courts and federal courts of appeal to advise on issues involving the interpretation or application of one of the many civil rights laws mentioned in this presentation. including in cases involving the rights of LGBTI individuals, as well as individuals with HIV and AIDS. For more information about our appellate work, you can go to the appellate website at justice.gov/crt/about/APP. And information on how to suggest a federal appellate case to us as a candidate for us to possibly file such a brief in is also available at that website. So in terms of additional resources, the Civil Rights Division has an LGBTI working group with members from all parts of the division with expertise in all of the various laws that I just discussed. And this working group advises division leadership on legal and policy issues related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and discrimination based on HIV/AIDS. We explore how existing civil rights laws might address discrimination experienced by LGBTI individuals. And we identify matters and cases for potential participation by the division. We also provide technical assistance to other department components and federal agencies. We conduct outreach to relevant stakeholders, and we assist the department with various diversity and education initiatives. We have a specific email address just for the LGBTI working group, and any questions about anything I've discussed to do with LGBTI rights, you can direct to that email address, which is crt-lgbti@usdoj.gov. And the folks who monitor and respond to that email box have expertise in this area, and we encourage folks to contact us with questions or with complaints if they think that someone they know or they themselves have been the victim of discrimination. And to contact, well, as I just said on the next slide, to contact the working group, there is the email address I just mentioned. You can also just file a complaint with the Civil Rights Division, and that information is at justice.gov/crt/complaint, or you can file complaints with the other federal agencies that we've mentioned in this presentation that have responsibility for investigating a particular claim or area of the law.
And I think that concludes our presentation on fighting discrimination against individuals with HIV and AIDS. So we want to thank you. We know it was a lot of information. We really tried to give you a really good comprehensive overview of what we do and what we could do to fight HIV discrimination. So now I'm going to turn it back over. We want to thank you for your time. Megan and I do. Turn it back over to Matthew at this time.
Excellent. We have quite a queue of questions, and I'm trying to get back to where I was with them. But we'll start with the first one in the queue is there anything for dentists in terms of discrimination laws and applying?
So the Americans with Disabilities Act addresses dentists if they work for a public employer, they're addressed, or if they work for a private employer, they are addressed. So it may be that they're a public accommodation if they're private, or they're covered as a public entity, but they're absolutely covered. And if you have a complaint against a dentist, you can direct that to us as we handle those directly. And certainly there have been cases to do with discrimination by dentists, and we have generally found that they cannot refer someone to a specialist dentist because they have HIV. So if someone is being referred or denied treatment by a dentist because they have HIV, we strongly encourage you to let us know that that's happening.
Excellent. The next question is, I understand that there was an online form to file an ADA complaint. How will folks know what information to provide?
The online form gives you prompts of what information we need. So if you go to ada.gov or to ada.gov/AIDS, we have a link to that form. You can also submit it by fax, or you can call for more information, but generally what we're going to need is to know who you're alleging discriminated, and what happened, and current contact information, because we will follow up with you for further information if we don't have enough information in the complaint itself. So it is very helpful if you provide us with a phone number and email address so we can contact you to get more information.
And if when you're describing what happened, if you can also include the date it happened, because sometimes it's unclear like what month it happened and what year, so that would be very important.
Excellent. The next question I will answer, yes, the slides will be made available. I should be sending them out tomorrow at the latest. The next question for the panel is, does the EEOC have an online portal for filing complaints?
That one, honestly, I would have to check on their website. So if you go to eeoc.gov, it says how to file a complaint with them, and when we send the rest of the information, we can also follow up and see if that's there. But the best way to check would be to go to eeoc.gov or to call them at the number we provided.
Excellent. Would the CRIPA cover denial of HIV/AIDS medications?
So whether under kripa or under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which also covers prisons and detention centers, denial of medications can be covered if it is on the basis of someone's disability and is in a discriminatory manner. It's going to be very fact-specific in terms of how long the delay, why there was a delay. But yes, that may be covered as discriminatory. And again, if you file a complaint with us, we can make sure it gets to the right people to address it.
And that's especially so if the allegation is that the delay is intentional. Like, someone needs a particular medication and maybe, a prison guard just doesn't like this person, is refusing to give this person the medication they require. So the more details you provide, the more helpful it will be for us when we actually evaluate the actual complaint. But we do have a lot of individuals with office who really focus on HIV work and what happens in the context of the prison setting.
How long do you have to show a pattern if an employer has discriminated based on HIV status?
So an individual does not have to show a pattern at all. It could be an individual act one time. You have to file within that window of either 180 or 300 days, depending on what state you're in. We have authority at the DOJ to investigate patterns of discrimination, but a single act of discrimination is sufficient and is protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And that's just not an employment context. That's under all the different titles. So if you just have one allegation of discrimination based on HIV, whether it be under Title I, Title II, or Title III of the ADA, you can file an individual complaint. Everybody's complaint is important to us.
Gotcha. Next question. There was talk about the technical guidance you have given for HIV criminalization law. How do we make sure that this guidance gets passed along and implemented at the state level? What is DOJ doing about making sure that state attorneys are following the guidance and understand what the guidance means?
Well, we strongly encourage folks to reproduce and distribute the guidance. It is a public document. It's on our website. And we certainly hope that folks do read that and pass it along to anyone in their state who they think it might be helpful to. In terms of what DOJ is doing, I can't speak to anything that we have not done publicly yet, but we do generally do outreach, and if folks request for us to speak about our HIV-specific criminal law guidance, that is certainly a request that we will consider and may be able to do more detailed presentations on.
Okay. Do people living with HIV/AIDS have the money to pay for a lawyer if they want to file a complaint? How many people do not file because they're afraid of this?
Well, the good thing is we work for the Department of Justice, so you don't have to spend any money to file a complaint with us. We are enforcement attorneys authorized by the United States Congress and the Attorney General of the United States to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. Included with underneath our enforcement powers is actually to take complaints and to investigate allegations of discrimination based on HIV. So if you want to file a complaint because a person believes that he or she was discriminated against because of HIV or AIDS, all you have to do is fill out the form. It would not cost you a penny. And so the good thing is to get this information out to your network of individuals you are in contact with, because I believe that a lot of people might not know that. And so that is the one great thing about our office. We get paid by the federal government, and you don't have to pay us money. We can't even take money if you wanted to give us money. But we can take your complaint.
I think that's a really important point to note. People do not need to hire an attorney to file a complaint with us, and we do our investigation. It should not cost you anything. That said, we don't represent the individual. If they want to hire an attorney, there are a lot of organizations out there, like Legal Aid, who provide those services to low-income folks at very little cost, if any. And, you know, we are always happy to provide contacts for local organizations that specialize in these areas and that provide services in these areas if folks need.
Okay. Last question I have in the queue. I imagine that people who are intersex may not like having themselves identified as a disability, despite the fact that the ADA offers discrimination protections. Have you heard this expressed?
I think that that is a challenge in every area. I think there are folks with HIV who also may not like to identify as having a disability. But I think it's important to understand that, you know, whether or not you adopt that label for yourself, that these protections are available to you. So, you know, you don't need to call it a disability, but those folks are protected by this law. And I think it's important for them to know that if they're discriminated against, they do have possible recourse.
Excellent. That covers everything in queue. Oh, I thank you so much for answering all the questions. And that covers everything in the queue. Are there any other questions? Anyone? You can answer them or raise your hand. I can unmute your line. Going once. Going twice. Gone. If you do have a question, feel free to email me and I can pass the information along to the presenters. I'll also be emailing out the, like I said, the webinar as soon as I get everything queued up and set on my end. I want to thank our presenters for joining us. It was a great discussion with a lot of really important information for folks. So thank you so much for being on the call.
Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate the partnership.
Thank you so much. And we will also be sending you some additional handouts, which you can find on our website, but just so that folks can have those directly, including like a frequently asked questions guide on discrimination against people with HIV.
Excellent. I'll include that in my stuff that's going out. All right. Well, everyone have a great day, whatever time zone you happen to be in, and we look forward to all the attendees on our next brown bag. It will be in November, talking about HIV vaccines. Thanks, everyone, again, and have a lovely rest of your days.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.